This is Linux In-Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux In-Laws, Season 2, Episode 3. Martin, how's the world
Chris.
treating you?
Oh, that could be a very long answer. Very long answer. So
let's keep it short, Martin. Let's keep it short. Okay.
Yeah.
I reckon, let me put it this way, the Worcester household is still in existence. Water flows, electricity is still there, because otherwise we wouldn't be recording this episode.
Indeed. If I was living anywhere else in the country, probably water would flow inside my living room. we're okay where we are. Yeah.
Okay, so it's still living the high life on the hill. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, something like that. Okay. What about yourself?
Martin can't really complain. We're recording this in the September of 2027. Germany has been flooded once again with high levels of water. Only Frankfurt remains above sea levels.
But you have some other country that's some splinter country called Bavaria that's kind of hilly.
No. No, this is called the Netherlands, Martin, you see.
No. I'm sure you've got this people walk around in lederhosen and stuff, isn't that in Bavaria?
What does that have to do with...
And drink beer all the time.
That's a popular misconception.
But they have hills, don't they? I thought.
Yeah, but you see, technically, they're only part of Germany technically.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much like Birmingham and the rest of the UK. The rest of England.
I thought you were going to say Catalonia or something.
But this is not a podcast about Bavaria or Catalonia or the UK, but rather about open source concepts and projects and all the rest of it. So, Martin, why don't you get us going?
All right.
On tonight's episode, as in topic of the episode.
Tonight's topic is real-time Linux. So,
excellent, Martin. So what exactly is real-time?
Well, this is a good question. Because
as usual, yes.
As well done. No, depending on who you ask, you get a different answer. So
very much so. Especially, I mean, if you ask a woman, what's a man like, you get a different answer than if you ask a man, what's a man like, right? I mean, what describes a man? Let's put it this way. A man will probably say a body, somebody who's able to drink beer, lots of it, drive a car, probably not in that order, maybe the other way around, and looks after his mates. Whereas a woman may have a totally different perspective on manhood.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Probably very true, but then that would be something for a psychology podcast.
Yes, which we won't go into. So, why don't we kind of set the scene on a very abstract level? What actually is what real-time really is? Let me throw my 2 cents into the ring.
Okay.
A real-time system basically guarantees things.
Okay. And what kind of things?
As in that a certain task is executed until a certain deadline. And a hard real-time system actually considers it to be a failure if that principle is violated. Imagine a...
Well, before you carry on there,
yes.
What do you mean by a hard real-time system versus a
There's also a soft real-time system. A soft real-time system, actually, if you press it hard enough, you'll leave dents in it.
Okay.
Whereas a hard real-time system, it doesn't matter how hard you push it, there will be no dents on the surface.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Doesn't sound very much like software, but there we go.
You see,
carry on.
this is the beauty about software. It comes in many shapes and disguises.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, no, going back to long forgotten old university days. I mean, the way I learned it, and I reckon that's still true in modern times, a hard real-time system, basically. If you violate a deadline in terms of a task, telling the operating system that I have to be finished by then and then, if you violate that deadline because some other tasks prevent this in terms of steal the CPU, steal the core, that sort of thing, and the original task cannot finish its work, that's considered to be a system failure. Like, for example, the operating system of a pacemaker, because if a pacemaker doesn't function anymore, the person carrying it is pretty much dead. Or any other medical system also applies. Soft real-time systems, on the other side, do tolerate that deadline violation. Imagine a video or an audio system. If you miss a chunk of audio, you will probably hear a glitch, but the world doesn't stop turning. Same goes for video. If you miss a frame, and we are looking at today's games with 50 frames, 60 frames per second. Martin will go into the details because he's the gamer between the two of us.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you miss a frame or two, you being a human will hardly notice this. So this is a soft real-time system because the world doesn't stop turning if you violate that deadline.
Yeah, I mean the deadline point is an interesting point. I mean that's I mean it's not specific in a way to real time. Every operating system has deadlines and schedulers, but I guess what the difference is the guarantees here that we're trying to point out, right? Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly the difference between a real-time system and a non-real-time system. Non-real-time systems, like traditional Linux systems, do this on a best effort basis. So you divvy up the available CPU slices, as in the bandwidth that the cores give you in your laptop, desktop, what have you, between the different tasks as they appear. Traditional Linux/Unix systems have a so-called NAS value. Details may or may not be in the show notes, or will be in the show notes. It's straightforward, actually. A NAS value is essentially a priority that is used by the standard scheduler that the kernel, and we will explain what a kernel is in a second, that is used by the kernel to execute a certain process or task, for want of a better expression. Of course, a process does consist of individual threads. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm tempted to say a process is a set of threads that have a certain priority attached to them. Now, Martin, what is an operating system kernel?
That's the bit that does all the work. It puts the what's his name? The God, this is a long time ago. The operations on the CPU, right? It controls the CPU cycles.
Yes, a very
instructions. There we go.
Yes. A very politically incorrect description, and this is what I heard way back when the PC police wasn't around. But I'm tempted to quote this regardless, because we are explicit at the end of the day. An operating system is pretty much like your housewife or the man of the house that does all the chores, like mopping the floor, getting the groceries in, making sure that the heat is on,
executing tasks.
Exactly, and that bills are paid. Exactly, that's exactly it. So if you have the notion of an operating system, like the GUI, the applications that come with it, and some other bits and pieces, the kernel is actually the underlying layer that marries the hardware with the upper layers. Like the graphical user interface, which is more often than not used these days for operating systems, like your bash, like your command line interface, that sort of thing, but works in the background, and that's exactly what Martin just rightly described about a minute ago. It takes care of scheduling tasks or process on the CPU, allocates memory, deallocates memory, controls access to hard drives, printers, and what have you. And needless to say, also manages network devices. Exactly, that's exactly it. And for the purpose of this discussion, one of the more important traits of an operating system is actually the ability to schedule tasks and also to implement certain scheduling policies in terms of how these tasks based on certain constraints and priorities, as I just explained, it would be one of them, are executed.
Yeah, because on your typical system, there are many, many different processes running, and they can't all run at the same time, right? That's just
So that's
why
the
we need
kernel for you.
scheduling, indeed.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So,
Okay, so
what else is there to say about real-time systems?
well,
Not much, right? Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the. I'm joking.
yeah, we can talk about some of the key features, I guess, of a real-time. In this case, Linux, but it doesn't necessarily have to any real-time operating system, right? Yeah, we'll focus on Linux today.
We are Linux podcast, no? Well, we are an open source podcast anyway. But anyway.
Yeah. Should we mention preemption then?
We should, Martin.
Okay.
You want to give it a go?
Well, we just did.
Oh, indeed. So preemption, there you have it. No, preemption, every modern operating system uses preemption. Essentially, preemption is the capability of a task preempting another one. So in a very high level description, the way all
preempting, kind of interrupting, right?
Exactly. All modern operating systems work. And this also is true for Windows, Mac OS, because underneath there's a BSD personality running on a microkernel called Mark, but that also goes for mainframe operating systems like ZOS and anything in between. You have essentially a clock that is able to generate a so-called interrupt that, as the name implies, interrupt the flow of control within a normal operational cycle. Now, this interrupt is handled by a so-called interrupt handler. Pun intended. This interrupt handler essentially checks in collaboration with the scheduler, I'm using Linux now as an example, if the current task has already used up its CPU slice, as in the amount of time that the kernel has allocated to executing it. And if that's the case, the control goes to a different process as in task. If that's not the case, the task or the process can continue working. That's preemption for you.
Yeah, but the whole point of interrupts is also to give higher priority processes kind of preference as well, right? Like your mouse movements or whatever, or anyway, anything with a higher priority to be able to interrupt something that is lower priority. Yeah. Okay. What else should we?
We should probably talk about scheduling algorithms.
Okay.
So if you can't get to sleep, people, now is the time to really pay attention, because you will be asleep within the next 5 seconds.
Actually, before we go into the scheduling piece, at a kind of sort of more higher level, what kind of real-time Linuxes are there?
We should probably shelve that question until we have laid the theoretical foundation for the discussion.
You think? Okay.
This is basically what the script says that marketing sent to me this afternoon.
Did they?
Yeah, they did.
You didn't hire them again, did you?
Well, actually, you're not supposed to know this, but yes, I did, or somebody else did anyway.
I see. Okay, fair enough.
Marketing people, if you're listening, the pink slips will be on their way, because as soon as Martin finds out that we have a marketing department, you're pretty much gone.
Yeah.
So now's the time to take a look at Monster, LinkedIn. If anybody kind of reaches out for new positions, people go for it, just in case.
I can recommend Indeed as well in Germany. I think that's quite big, isn't it?
Martin, you know more than I do. Anyway, doesn't matter. Okay.
Oh yeah, you'll be
the subject.
Right, let's go. Okay. Scheduling. Yes.
Yeah, different scheduling algorithms. So we just have touched upon NAS values.
Yes.
The original Unix system deployed a multi-level round-robin scheduler. I won't go into the details, because in that case you won't be asleep on 5 seconds, but rather in 2. Suffice it to say, there are a couple of kind of schedulers, and I'm simplifying things now. Details for the so inclined will be in the show notes, because, as I said, we want to keep you awake until the boxes, if not further than that. The idea is essentially you have a round-robin scheduler that simply asks the task in a round-robin fashion, or that allocates CPU slices to tasks in a round-robin fashion. There's also something called FIFO, as in first in, first out.
Mhm.
Some operating systems, depending on the nature of the operating system, also do it the other way around, as in last in, first out, depending. But sometimes you will find different scheduling algorithms. For example, in the area of real-time operating systems, you have a scheduler called earliest deadline first. Now, why is that important? As the name implies, a real-time system has one important feature. It guarantees, especially a hard real-time system, that a certain task is executed by a defined deadline. And hence, these earliest deadline first, in terms of if there's a task that has to finish earlier than the current one running, this task can preempt the currently running one. This is a
What
very
do you have
important trait.
two of those tasks? I don't know.
Well, they compete, right?
Okay, fair enough.
This is
But
where
how are you going to guarantee the deadline?
this is where nanosecond clocks resolution come into play. Sorry,
Okay.
nanosecond resolution clocks come into place, because in that case the kernel can take an educated call. No, jokes aside, it really depends on the use case. I mean, if you have a robot that is, say, a robot that is putting together cars, a couple of milliseconds don't matter, because if you stop the motion a millisecond earlier or later, doesn't matter. So I would even go as far as describing this as software real-time system. But on the other side, if you're running a pacemaker, I reckon you will get away with a millisecond. But if you're running some medical imaging system, or if you're running a what's it called, Martin? Large Hadron Collider, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Where
what about
nanoseconds do count.
your financial trading bot? That's going to be more fairly.
Well, sure, yes. If you're into high frequency trading,
yes. Forget about all this medical stuff.
Every nanosecond does count.
Yeah.
So this is actually This is precisely how EDF schedulers work, and they. Although this may really sound theoretical, actually, when it comes down to real-time Linux, they are actually used. Because that's essentially, for example, what these approaches to real-time Linux actually use under the hood. And now, Martin, we're actually getting to the projects.
Okay, well, I've got a few more questions on the technical side.
The answer to your first one would be 34, 22, 21, 15, 12, 5,
I think
7,
the answer is normally
8.
42, isn't it? But yeah,
No. These will be
these are the lotto numbers. Okay,
exactly. But we got to leave.
And any particular year? Or...
Exactly. But we got to leave the week and the year open. Exactly.
I see. That's not
Any other questions, Martin?
I suppose you could just repeat the same numbers for the next 10 years. And
in different sequences, yes. I don't know. Anyway, okay. Jokes aside.
So what other kind of attributes does a real-time kernel need to have, right?
Predictability probably comes in first, in terms of it can.
Well, what about memory as well?
It's there for the taking.
Yeah, well, you don't want to guarantee that you have that memory for its duration, rather than normal Linuxes potentially could get swapped out to disk, right? All those kind of things.
Well, you see, this is basically why you put it into a castle that is surrounded by a mold, and you got this castle actually with crocodiles and saber-toothed tigers and all the rest of it. No, Martin has raised a very important point. What you don't want to do is actually swap the memory in and out for a real-time task that has a hard deadline, because that will introduce non-predictability. Because any swapping activity, as in where the kernel takes a page of memory or a couple of pages and swaps this out to disk and back, that introduces additional latency. And that's exactly what you don't need in a real-time system. So normally what real-time systems guarantee is that they actually lock the memory pages in main memory so that no swapping takes place.
Excellent. That sounds good. What about something like CPU pinning and stuff like that? Is that also an attribute for?
Normally not, because real-time systems do make the assumption that all cores are equal. But, of course, with the advent of low-energy cores, that has changed.
Yes. What if you have to wake it up first? That would be.
Well, you see, low-energy cores, yes, can be woken up, but also, as the name implies, probably do run on a lower CPU frequency. And that
Indeed.
again, that introduces another level of determinism in terms of not all cores are clocked equally. So that's another level of complexity, because if you have some cores that run on frequency X, and then the rest of the cores run on frequency Y, that makes predictability a bit hard.
Yeah, understand.
So in that case, you probably wouldn't use a real-time kernel on a 64-core ARM architecture that has low energy cores, pretty low energy cores, energy-saving cores, and dead cores, or something like that. I don't know. As in cores that don't do, lazy cores, as in cores that don't do any work at all. Yet to be invented. Limited. If you're listening, you heard it here first. If you want to go for this, that's a patent violation. You want to send a mail to feedback at Linux in-laws before you do this.
That's an interesting concept. Yeah, just put a few thousand in there, just half of them not doing it. Very power efficient as well.
These would be unionized cores, exactly. So, people, if you're listening, that's the next big thing. Unionized cores in your ordinary kind of laptop or desktop. Not doing much, but just rather taking it easy. Unions, if you want to get in touch for the politically correct version of this, the email address is feedback@linuxinlaws.eu.
Yes.
Okay, back to the issue at hand.
Which was
so we covered memory, we covered preemption, we covered tasks, we covered CPU cores. What else is there?
Okay.
I/O devices, yes.
Well, what about I/O devices?
I/O devices
interrupts.
Yes, they do. But I/O devices can be bitches. Why?
Because they produce many interrupts.
They give you false promises, exactly.
Well, but that doesn't really.
I mean, imagine your ordinary hooker on a decent weekend. I mean, she looks great, but in the morning, you are really wondering why you spent all that money on her or him or whatever.
Oh, that sounds like a very expensive evening out. Take all night anyway. Let's not go there.
Well, actually, kids, if you're listening, this was a joke, right? You're not supposed to mingle with hookers unless you really want to. And get permission from your parents first, just in case. Good anyway, idea. No, jokes aside, I mean, what happens if you want to access a disk? You tell the disk controller, and this is a bit technical now, so stay awake, people. You tell the disk controller, now I need this in this block. Okay. In the olden
days... If you're reading this, yeah.
Exactly. In the olden days, where you had spinning Rust, in terms of you had a disk of metal spinning in a drive, the controller, maybe also the operating system, would have a rough idea where the head on the disk is, and if the head is not on the corresponding track where the data is, how to get there. But again, that would introduce a certain level of non-deterministic behavior, because, rather in the worst case, you would have to travel the whole disk in order to get to the data. Especially if an operating system does frequent disk accesses and is running low on in-memory cache.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of imagine any real-time operation doesn't involve any spinning disks or any disk at all, to be honest. But
that's the reason why
there's considerable different level of latency, right?
That's precisely the reason why you normally tend to keep I/O to an absolute minimum in real-time systems, because you do not need that non-deterministic behavior.
But there's the difference. Even RAM has a higher latency than your CPU cache, right? So it's if you're gonna talk about nanoseconds, then you want to
correct, absolutely spot on, yes,
reduce all these kind of things.
Exactly. But the good news is basically
Good news
that
is.
hard real-time systems, I mean, especially kind of in medical situations, industrial situations, basically mostly go down to the microsecond level. So yes, cache misses come into play, but more often than not, especially if you're dealing with mechanical environments like robot arms, you can deal with a couple of microseconds of delay here and there.
Well, it depends how fast these robots are, right?
Correct. I mean, if you're gathering data from a large hadron collider, that's probably not the way to go, because if you miss that window,
Yep.
a couple of millions, just as in euros or dollars, just went down the drain.
Yeah, I think I can't remember what the resolution is on that thing, but it's definitely less than a millisecond, I'm sure.
You
Anyway.
don't have that much time to collect the data exactly.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So, right, you were going to talk about some of the distributions.
Well, there are kind of two important projects, right? There's something called RT Linux that goes back to the early 2000s, which is a very interesting project actually, because again, links will be in the show notes. Some people came up with the idea, okay, we have an Linux kernel that is by its very nature, then we're talking about 20 years back now, not non which doesn't exhibit a real-time behavior. So what we're going to do essentially, we're going to give it a microkernel, as in a stripped-down version of the Linux kernel called RT Core, which is actually capable of handling real-time tasks. And consider the ordinary Linux kernel as the stuff that is not capable of real time, just as an idle task. So any task that has real-time requirements is executed by the RT core, and then any task that has no real-time requirements is executed by the ordinary Linux kernel.
Okay.
The project, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, it's we're saying it's a microkernel on top of the normal one, or is it some patches to the standard kernel?
Well, the implementation is I wouldn't say straightforward, but essentially what you're doing, you are implementing the microkernel functionality as part of modules that pretty much take over the Linux kernel.
Okay.
As in the standard one. So
yeah,
using a kind of probably not optimal picture as an architecture, by loading these modules, the microkernel lives somewhat underneath the normal Linux kernel, and any task running on RT Core is able to preempt any other task depending on its characteristics. So this RT Core is able to give you a hard real-time behavior in terms of a hard real-time system.
Yeah, there's a similar one that's called Xenomai or something like that, isn't it?
Yes, links with the show notes. Again, I mean, there have been quite a few projects that have attempted to introduce real-time behavior into the kernel, ranging from Articore to Xiaomi or whatever it's called. Pronunciation is off, but again, these will be in the show notes. To something called Preempt RT, which we'll cover in a minute. But essentially, all the idea behind all these modifications to this kernel was to introduce at least soft, if not hard time behavior to the kernel.
Yeah, true.
Which wasn't Linus's intention when he started to write Linux about almost 30 years ago. More than 30 years ago, actually, because we're recording this in 2024. So he had this kind of generic operating system in mind that would just do round-robin scaling, what have you, pretty much emulating, I'm tempted to say, the traditional Unix behavior with no real-time behavior in mind.
Yeah.
But then people discovered the very nature of this truly great open source project, and as you can do with open source software, started to modify it. And that's exactly how RT Core and some other technologies came into play a couple of years later. As I said, articles, the first patches, and again, details will be in the show notes, the first patches for Articore appeared around 2004, so about 20 years ago. It's GPL2 licensed. The people tried to monetize this with the company that was bought later on by Intel. And the original Articore implementation has fallen a little bit to the wayside. But then later on, people came up with a truly real-time patch for the kernel itself, which is called preempt_RT, that was somewhat influenced by Articore. In terms of, you still have your original Linux kernel, but you don't have a separate microkernel implemented by modules, but rather what you do is actually enhance the name patch. You modify any behavior in the kernel that is in the way of real-time handling a task in accordance to a real-time guarantee. So what this preempt, and hence the name RT patch, does is it introduces an awful lot of preemption points in the kernel where the kernel itself can be interrupted. Now, in normal Linux, and again, I'm greatly simplifying things, normally you cannot interrupt the kernel if you're not an interrupt yourself. Because once you're in the kernel, as in if an application does a kernel application, like it wants to write a block to a disk or something like that, you normally cannot interrupt this kernel function unless you're a time interrupt, or a disk interrupt, or an I/O interrupt. But that is handled by the kernel itself. So from an application perspective, once you're in the kernel, that's it. But this preempt RT does exactly introduce a certain set of additional preemption points where actually the kernel itself can be interrupted. So that allows I'm almost going to say hard real-time behavior to be implemented in the Linux kernel by introducing additional preemption points, but also introducing additional semantics with regards to, for example, locking and other functionality. Again, we won't go into the details because that's all on web pages and man pages and all the rest of it. So we're going to leave it at that level because the details are quite technical. But suffice it to say, this is basically how this patch, and this patch is quite comprehensive. If you take a look at the kernel sources, this is how this patch achieves this.
And it's also used by Red Hat and Ubuntu real-time. That preempt RT patch, right?
Exactly, and that's a very interesting point because these two projects that you just mentioned, and Ubuntu probably being the most prominent one, I'm tempted to say, because Canonical has a product out there called, what's it called? Ubuntu Server Realtime or something like this. Again, details within the show notes.
Ubuntu Realtime, yeah.
Ubuntu Realtime, exactly. This patch hasn't been introduced or is slowly introduced in the kernel mainline. What these two companies actually have done is they have introduced that patch behavior as part of their own kernel spins. As probably many of you listeners do know, Red Hat and Ubuntu take the generic kernel and patch it themselves. And that's exactly how they introduce this real-time behavior. So if anybody is still awake, maybe?
I think maybe they would like to know what they can do with it.
Yes, use it. Simple.
Well, no, are they going to build their own base bake?
I mean, it really depends on the use case. I mean, if you want to go for home automation, you may have a use case with kind of controlling some time-sensitive equipment in your home, like your low-orbit ion cannon. That sort of thing. Details, of course, may not be in the show notes. No, jokes aside.
I think milliseconds are probably okay for that one.
If you need precise timing for some devices, and I'm just using that cannon as an example not to be repeated at home, kids, because you're dealing with trained professionals here. So don't use a low ion cannon at home. I'm just saying. No, jokes aside, but I mean, if you have some other equipment that needs real time behavior, you want to probably do your own spin or just use some of the existing projects. But I reckon the real value is actually in the industrial applications or medical applications or even physics that needs that sort of real time behavior.
Well, I still think the trading bot is the best example.
The what?
The trading bot.
The trading bot, yes.
Yes.
So if you go for high frequency trading, doing Bitcoin or some other stuff, you want to make sure that your architecture is not just using dark fiber, but also real-time behavior.
Indeed. Yeah, you don't want your cat video to interrupt your important
No. And you don't want to have your billions disappear. Sam, if you're listening. Everyone's a freak, man. Anyway, okay. Is there anything else that we should discuss before we go to the boxes?
I guess, yeah. Where do we see this going, this real-time Linux?
World domination, as usual.
Okay.
I mean, that falls in line with the usual Linux approach, no? As an open source.
Well, actually, is there any specific hardware required for this?
Yes. As said before, you want to rely on standard industrial hardware that has a common characteristic of cores, because as soon as you use any of this low energy nonsense, you have non-deterministic behavior introduced in your architecture, because some of the cores are running at lower speed, some of the cores are running at a standard speed, some of the cores are running at a higher speed. So the more, what's the word I'm looking for, coherent the characteristic of the cores are, the better, unless your kernel, heavily modified, I reckon, can deal with that.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
So the message is, people, just go back about 40 years, buy this legacy PCAT running an 8086 on eBay, not just by one, but rather by 100. And don't worry about the energy consumption. Just make sure that you have put a sign on your door and that says, "Mr. Greta Thunberg, stay out of here," as in you're not allowed in here. So, because I mean, these processors do not have multiple cores; they have just a single core, and that's it. And that's exactly what you want in terms of an ultimate predetermined deterministic behavior.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good.
Or simply buy one of the older Intel SMP systems that don't worry about low energy crap
the
and
power
that sort
usage.
of thing. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I think that probably covers about it.
On to the boxes, Mr. Visser. What's your box?
Yes, my POX is a series called the Class of 909, which is
this is your class, right? As in 1909.
No, because it does feature the FBI, which I was never in. And
full disclosure, people, Mr. Visser was never part of the FBI. Any rumors
no.
otherwise are just lies.
I think you'd probably have to be born in America to be part of the FBI. Anyway, who knows?
This is the theory, right?
It doesn't matter. No idea.
Okay.
It seems quite sensible, but it's kind of okay. Long story short, it covers a certain the FBI have their recruitment and so on, and a certain class of 09. It follows them through the past, the present, and the future. In the future, where the AI has taken over all the investigations and makes its own decisions about who is a criminal and not, and so on. So it kind of brings it into the modern age a little bit, and then it all goes wrong, obviously, and so on, and they have to save the world from the AI. But it's kind of nice nice story. Good, yeah.
IMDb rating is,
don't know, actually.
Okay, you know, and the Visa rate, the official Visa rating is what?
Probably about
8 out of 10?
8 or 9, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. My Pox. My Pox would be a movie called Fast X.
Oh,
It's part. Do you know it?
is it not got Vin Diesel in it or something? No,
Absolutely. Spot on, Mr.
yes,
Sir.
yes.
It's part of the Fast and Furious franchise.
Oh, okay. Oh, 10. Yes,
It's
of course.
yes, it's
10,
exactly.
not X.
It's
10. 10.
well, the official title is actually Fast X, but don't worry
No,
about
no,
it.
no. This is
It's
Roman.
exactly, Martin. Exactly. That's the point.
Okay.
So
Not sure I've
the
seen that one
movie
actually.
the movie is a bit long. Fair enough. I think it clocks in at 5 hours 20 minutes or something like that. But
How many cars are blown up here?
about 20,364 and a half. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Probably. Yeah.
No, jokes aside, it's your typical Fast and Furious sequel, prequel, whatever you will call it. But the opening scene alone, where they push that bomb through Rome, the special effects are just amazing.
Okay. I'm just wondering if I've seen this or not. I've seen quite a few of them. Oh, it is from this year. Okay, no, I haven't seen it.
It's from this year.
Okay.
If you're into action movies that don't require a 5-hour analysis with regards to the deep philosophical meaning,
Indeed,
this is probably your movie you want to watch.
Yeah,
No, jokes aside, it's quite interesting, it's quite entertaining, and the special effects are quite amazing. Let's put it this way. With regards to the FXs, I would probably give it an 11 out of 10. The storyline, again, as goes for any other Fast and Furious movie, of course, is subject to debate, but it's okay. But again, the special effects really drive this movie.
Okay. I'll have to catch up on that one. I've seen most of them.
Give it a shot if you're so inclined, because that's actually one of the few installments you don't want to miss. If you're into special effects.
I think I've probably seen all the previous ones, and they're all quite entertaining. Yes.
Indeed.
Very good.
And with that, we've come to the end of another glorious episode of something called Linux in-laws.
Yes,
so,
if you have your own real-time Linux projects, get in touch.
Yeah, exactly. The feedback address, as usual, is feedback. Actually, we don't have any feedback that we should cover, no?
Oh, there was something about some urgent thing that we had to do, but yeah, that's probably not real feedback.
Adam Adam congratulated us on 100th episode.
Yes, he did.
Episode. So our heart, as usual, goes out to you.
Yes.
And any marketing people out there listening, if you are looking for a
very short-term job,
exactly. If you're looking for 5 minutes of employment, the email address is geeks _marketing at linuxinlaws.eu.
Indeed.
Maybe we can push that to 10 minutes if Martin is not listening.
Yes.
This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.